Ever think about how a small idea, like a seed, can grow into something so much bigger? We're going back to 1985 Massachusetts. Picture a startup, maybe not making headlines, but with this big ambition to make a real difference in people's lives.
Yeah, and that's where our deep dive begins today with the story of Hologic. It's fascinating how they started by tackling a very specific problem and became a global force in women's health.
You're right, a very specific problem. Back then, osteoporosis, they called it the silent epidemic. People didn't even know they had it until, bam, a fracture. And doctors, they didn't have the tools to diagnose it properly.
Imagine trying to check a building's foundation without the right equipment. That's what it was like. Hologic's founders, Jay Stein and David Ellen Bogan, they saw that gap.
They didn't set out to build a massive company, right?
Not initially, no. They wanted to solve this very real medical need. They were driven by the challenge to create a better way to diagnose osteoporosis.
And in 1987, they did just that. They introduced the QDR system, the world's first DXA bone densitometer. DXA, that stands for dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, in case anyone's wondering.
It was a game changer. Doctors finally had a precise way to measure bone density. They could accurately diagnose and monitor osteoporosis. It wasn't just about helping individual patients, it was about advancing the whole field of bone health.
It put Hologic on the map, right? As a leader in medical imaging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And their initial success, even with modest revenues at first, proved that a laser focus, a real purpose, could lead to something huge.
And that innovative spirit, that's something Jay Stein talked about, right? He said innovation is how we went from a small, unknown manufacturer to the world-class organization we are today. It's how we'll become an international giant.
Yeah.
Pretty prophetic.
Yeah, and from day one, there was this palpable energy at Hologic. Curiosity, dedication, a mission to use science and technology to truly improve lives. And even though they started with bone health, you could see the seeds of a broader commitment to women's health being planted.
So they had this breakthrough bone density scanner. How did they make that leap into the wider world of women's health?
Well, their first decade was all about building expertise in medical imaging, particularly bone densitometry. But by the mid-90s, they started to see a bigger picture, the diverse needs of women's health. Breast cancer screening, that's where they saw a real need for improvement.
Because back then, it was all about film mammography, like old school photography.
Exactly. The images weren't always clear, sharing them was clunky. But then digital technology started to emerge, and Hologic, they jumped on that opportunity.
They must have seen the potential right away.
Oh, absolutely. Around 1999-2000, they made a strategic move into mammography. They acquired companies with imaging expertise, started developing their own digital system. They even incorporated this advanced amorphous selenium detector. It's like a super-sensitive film, captures clearer X-ray images, potentially with less radiation.
And then in 2002, they got FDA approval for the Hologic Selenium mammography system.
It was a turning point, dubbed the beginning of a new era in breast cancer screening, one of the first full-field digital mammography systems. No more film, everything's digital, high-resolution images, easy to store, share, review. Radiologists could zoom in, adjust contrast, so much better for spotting potential problems. Plus, it laid the groundwork for even more advanced imaging, like 3D.
So they went from bone scanners to battling breast cancer. That's a pretty impressive shift.
It was. And during this time, they were also keeping an eye on other innovations in women's health, like the ThinPrep Pap test, revolutionized cervical cancer screening, approved in 1996, and the Novissure system, for abnormal uterine bleeding, approved in 2001.
But those weren't Hologic products yet, right?
No. ThinPrep was developed by Citic, Novissure was independent, but Hologic's leadership, they were paying attention. They started to see themselves as a broader women's health company, addressing a wider range of needs.
Which leads us to an even bigger transformation, an acquisition.
Right. By the mid-2000s, you've got Hologic, strong in bone health and digital mammography, and Citic, leading in Pap tests and women's oncology diagnostics.
Two companies, both deeply committed to women's health.
Exactly. Approaching it from different angles, but with the clear synergy. And in 2007, it happened. Hologic acquired Citic, a massive deal, over $6 billion.
That's a lot of zeros.
It was. They called it one of the world's largest companies focused on advanced technology in women's health. A real turning point. Jack Cumming, the CEO at the time, talked about the complementary, best-in-class products, a powerful combination.
And Patrick Sullivan, Citic CEO, he became Hologic's chairman. He echoed that, the shared goal of improving women's health.
So what did this expanded portfolio look like? Well, suddenly, Hologic had Citic's leading technologies. The thin prep pap test, a game changer for cervical screening. It preserves cell samples in liquid, much clearer lab analysis. Then there was the rapid FFN test, that's fetal fibronectin. It helps assess the risk of preterm birth. They also acquired Mammocyte, a targeted radiation therapy for early-stage breast cancer. And on the surgical side, they added NovaSure for heavy menstrual bleeding and later MyoSure for removing uterine fibroids and polyps.
So from imaging, they expanded into diagnostics and even surgical treatments.
Exactly. Breast health, bone health, cervical health, gynecological health, they were covering it all. And it wasn't just about the products. It was about merging two strong, mission-driven cultures.
Hologic's motto, the science of sure, and CITIC's focus on preventing cervical cancer, they really aligned, didn't they?
They did. And as the companies integrated, Hologic solidified its position as a champion for women's health. Their workforce doubled, bringing in new expertise. They became known as the go-to innovator for women's healthcare solutions.
So they're a major player in a wide range of areas. But then they enter the world of molecular diagnostics.
Yeah, in the late 2000s, molecular testing detecting diseases at the DNA or RNA level was taking off. And GenProbe, they were pioneers in this field.
They had some impressive milestones, right?
Absolutely. The first FDA-cleared nucleic acid test for infectious diseases back in 1985, and the first molecular diagnostic test for an STI in 1988.
Wow. So what kind of instruments and tests did they create?
They created high-throughput instruments like the Tigris system and a range of assays like the Aptima test for STIs. They were also involved in Proclaic's blood screening tests, making blood transfusion safer by screening for viruses like HIV and hepatitis.
So why did Hologic decide to acquire GenProbe?
By 2012, Hologic saw molecular diagnostics as the future. GenProbe was a perfect fit to expand beyond imaging and into this crucial field, so they made the move and acquired them.
And that made them a leader in laboratory diagnostics, especially for women's health and STIs.
Exactly. A key asset GenProbe brought was their Panther system, a fully automated system. It was a game changer for labs. Imagine a super efficient lab assistant that handles everything, preparing samples, reading results, all automated. Faster testing, higher volume, less human error.
So Hologic could offer a complete solution for molecular testing.
Exactly. And they kept expanding the tests on the Panther platform. HIV, HPV, hepatitis, STIs, even respiratory viruses. This created amazing synergies.
Synergies, can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine an abnormal pap test result. Now with Panther, labs could seamlessly integrate HPV testing as a follow-up, a more comprehensive and efficient cervical cancer screening program.
So by bringing in GenProbe, they really diversified their capabilities.
They did. They were operating in three main segments: breast and skeletal health, diagnostic solutions, and GYN surgical solutions. Of course, an acquisition that big, it required some adjustments. Hologic wanted to sharpen their focus. In 2016, they divested their blood screening business to concentrate on diagnostics for patients and hospitals. They also continued with the razor and blade model, providing the instruments and the ongoing tests.
It sounds like this period of growth and acquisitions also led to some important leadership changes.
It did. As Hologic evolved, so did its leadership. David Ellenbogen, one of the founders, passed away in 2001. Jack Cumming led them through the CITIC merger. But by 2013, there was investor pressure. The stock wasn't performing as expected.
So what happened?
Jack Cumming came back as interim CEO. Carl Icahn, the activist investor, got involved, pushing for changes. And ultimately, in December 2013, Steve McMillan became president and CEO.
A new era for Hologic.
It was. McMillan had a lot of experience in the medical device industry. He focused on organic growth, operational efficiency, paying down debt, building a culture of accountability and purpose.
He had that famous quote, "The bigger we get, the better we are for women's health."
Exactly. He tied the company's success to its mission. He wanted everyone to understand that growth meant reaching and helping more women. Now, in 2017, they made a move that, in hindsight, wasn't their best. They acquired Cynosure, a company focused on aesthetic lasers.
That seemed a bit outside their core focus on diagnostics and medical devices.
It was. The idea was to diversify revenue, but Cynosure underperformed. Tough competition, even an FDA warning about some of their treatments. In 2019, McMillan admitted it hadn't gone well.
So what did they do?
They divested Cynosure in 2020, a tough decision, but it allowed them to refocus on their strengths. The lesson learned: stick to what you do best.
And what they do best is innovate in women's health. Let's talk about 3D imaging, a real breakthrough.
It was. They took their Selenia digital platform and went further, developing breast tomosynthesis, also known as 3D mammography. Traditional mammograms, they're 2D, a single image. 3D mammography takes multiple low-dose X-rays from different angles, creating a 3D reconstruction.
So it's like seeing the breast from all sides.
Exactly. And in 2011, their Selenia Dimension system with 3D mammography became the first commercial system to get FDA approval. Studies showed it improved the detection of invasive cancers, especially in dense breast tissue, plus fewer false positives, which is huge for reducing patient anxiety.
So they're constantly pushing the boundaries of breast cancer screening. What about advancements in other areas, like cervical cancer and STI testing, after they brought in GenProbe?
They've maintained leadership there, too. They kept improving their molecular tests, making them more automated and efficient, thanks to the Panther system. Their contribution to preventing cervical cancer has been huge. They've promoted combined PAP and HPV testing. Their ThinPrep is still the leading liquid-based cytology test, and their HPV assays all run smoothly on Panther.
And they're not just focused on the big-name issues, right?
That's right. In 2019, the FDA cleared their molecular assays for diagnosing vaginal infections, like bacterial vaginosis and yeast infections. These tests provide more accurate diagnoses, leading to better treatment.
So a lot of collaboration between their different divisions, too.
Absolutely. Their breast health division developed minimally invasive biopsy devices, like Affirm and Brevera. So if a mammogram spots something, patients can get a quick and precise biopsy, less invasive. By the end of the 2010s, Hologic was a powerhouse in women's health tech, a one-stop shop for a wide range of solutions.
And then 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. How did Hologic, with their expertise in diagnostics, respond?
The pandemic was a real test. They had to be agile, show their scientific strength, and their commitment to public health. As a leader in molecular diagnostics, they were in a unique position to help.
They developed COVID tests really quickly, right?
They did. In March 2020, they got FDA emergency use authorization for their Panther Fusion SARS-CoV-2 assay, and in May, EUA for their Aptima SARS-CoV-2 assay. These tests ran on their Panther systems, which were already in labs worldwide.
Those systems can process a lot of tests, right?
Over 1,000 in 24 hours. So Hologic really boosted global testing capacity when it was desperately needed. Steve McMillan said they almost single-handedly helped produce testing turnaround times.
A bold statement.
While many organizations contributed, Hologic played a vital role. McMillan's leadership during that time was crucial. He talked about how tough times reveal character, their entire workforce stepped up, and even amidst the pandemic, he kept emphasizing their core mission, women's health.
It seems like the pandemic solidified their commitment.
It did. They saw how crises can disproportionately affect women. They shipped tens of millions of COVID tests. And their financial success gave them more resources to invest back into their mission. McMillan was proud of how Hologic revealed its character.
So they're not just about products, they're about women's health and equity on a global scale.
Absolutely. One initiative is the Hologic Global Women's Health Index, launched with Gallup. It's a massive survey, over 60,000 women in over 100 countries. The goal is to understand the health of women and girls worldwide.
And use that data to drive change.
Exactly. It's about providing actionable, science-backed data to improve outcomes. They also focus on health disparities in the U.S. with their Project Health Equality. It addresses racial and ethnic inequities, focusing on Black and Hispanic women.
Like those mobile screening units and targeted outreach program.
Yes, and campaigns like Unmuting Fibroids, with the Black Women's Health Imperative, raising awareness about fibroids in Black women. It shows a commitment beyond just selling devices, ensuring access to care. Internally, their values are purpose, passion, and promise. They even display patient stories at their headquarters.
And that partnership with the Women's Tennis Association, the WTA, that was a big move.
It was. Becoming the title sponsor of the WTA Tour gives them a global platform to talk about women's health.
So where is Hologic today, and where are they headed?
They're a global leader in women's health technology, still investing heavily in R&D, making strategic acquisitions. Between 2020 and 2023, they acquired companies like Acessa Health, Biotheranostics, Somatax Medical, Diagenode, and Gynesonics.
All very strategic, focused on less invasive treatments and personalized diagnostics.
Exactly. They're exploring artificial intelligence in imaging to help radiologists and detect cancers earlier. They're developing next-generation diagnostic platforms. Their Global Access Initiative is bringing their technology to underserved areas. They have over 6,000 employees, and their products are in over 100 countries.
It's amazing how they started with an act of doing good, as Jay Stein said.
That ethos has stayed with them. They're poised to remain a leader in breast cancer screening, next-generation diagnostics, expanding outpatient surgical options, and they're committed to preventative care through initiatives like Breast Cancer Awareness Month, Cervical Health Awareness, and their WTA partnership. Their goal, as Steve McMillan says, is to improve the health of women globally.
It's been a fascinating journey. From a small startup in Massachusetts to a global leader in women's health.
It really shows what purpose-driven innovation can achieve. Their commitment is inspiring.
As we wrap up this deep dive, think about this. A singular focus on a seemingly small problem, like diagnosing osteoporosis, grew into a global mission. What other seemingly niche areas have that potential for change, in healthcare or beyond? It's a reminder of the power of innovation driven by a clear purpose.